Good evening and welcome to Q&A, very live from Docklands in Melbourne. I'm Tony Jones. Now, we did invite the government tonight and we do have a member of the opposition from the House of Reps, but no leave was granted for a government representative to join the panel. So joining us tonight, Economist and Businesswoman Judith Sloan, the head of the Council of Trade Unions, Kearney, leader of the Greens, Richard Di Natale, industrial relations commentator, Collier, Labor MP for Gellibrand, Tim Watts, and the Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, John Roskam. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Well, Q&A is live on ABC TV in New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania, and live everywhere else on News 24 at 9:35 Eastern Daylight Time, or you can watch and listen on iView, Facebook and News Radio. Well, the government made it clear that its intention is to focus on industrial relations this week, with the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull warning today that militant unions are costing Australia millions of dollars each year. Later this week, he'll seek to pass two bills aimed at curbing union power. Our first question tonight does go to industrial relations. It comes from Chris Brown.
Thank you. I worked as a maintenance fitter at the CUB Brewery in Abbotsford for 7 years. I've been a loyal employee, working hard to deliver a good product, reduce the cost per case and make a profit for the employer. Early this year, along with 54 of my workmates, I was sacked and my job was advertised with a substantially reduced wages and conditions by a company that does not pay tax in 2014-2015. My question is, do you think it's time that big business were held to account for the way they are treating their workers and this country?
OK, we might come back to you in a minute, Chris, but first we'll hear from Kearney.
Thanks, Chris. Absolutely, I think big business needs to be held accountable. This has been a very high-profile incidence of something that is happening way too often. And I think that it happened at an iconic brand where people really took notice, has tapped into an incredible anxiety of the workforce. And the workforce look at you, they look at your workmates and they think that could happen to me. You know, just sacked for no reason. And I don't think anybody could... You try to imagine the impact of that, going home to your family and saying, I haven't done anything wrong, I've worked hard, I now have no job. And if I want my job back, it's at, 35% or something of the pay that I was offered. And to make matters worse, there was a dodgy EBA around this that only 3 people signed on the other side of the country. There's no responsibility wanting to be taken by CUB itself. It's really, the whole situation is terrible. So absolutely, we think that employers and ultimately the end employer, the employer that you work for and make money for, should be held accountable and responsible for you, your position and your ongoing employment.
That point you just made there is relevant because Chris and the 54 others were employed by a Labor hire company called Quant, which contracted out to Carlton and United to provide maintenance. Now, that's the core here, isn't it? Because this couldn't happen otherwise.
That's right. This is, about a triangular employment relationship, and we're seeing it so often now. And they use it as a way to get out of their responsibilities of being an employer, a responsibility to you, a hard-working employee who's put in a lot, as you said. And ultimately, what the trade union movement is calling for and what we are asking the government to do is to, number one, make sure those labour hire firms are actually licensed, that they are rigid-dig, that they aren't used to evade the Fair Work Act, which we think a lot of employers are actually using them to do, and then that the ultimate responsibility should be held, that a person who employs you, the company that you're making money for and making profits for, should be held accountable. OK, I'm just going to go quickly back to Chris. And first of all, let me just ask you this. Are you a union organiser?
No, I'm not a union organiser.
A delegate?
I'm a union delegate. OK, I
just want to sort of get it clear because people will be sort of saying on Twitter that you're involved with the union. So I just want to know that. But just tell us, the 55 employees, how long... You said, I think you worked for 7 years. How long... by and large, the others work in this job?
Well, collectively, Tony, we've got 107 years of collective experience on that site. For example, myself and Alan Dinnan and Paul Jaffars, who's sitting next to me, there's 65 years combined experience sitting in these 3 seats right now.
So, obviously, this come as a shock to you?
Yeah, it did come as a shock.
OK, well, I'm going back to the other panellists now and here. Collier, this probably can only have happened because it's a labour hire company. What is your view?
Oh, look, it's a very difficult scenario, and I am very sorry for you losing your job, and I'm sorry that when anyone loses their job. But there's a few issues here. We have to think: was what happened? Did that occur within the legislation? And if it did, then I guess what you are saying is that the legislation should be different. But the point that I want to make to everybody is that there's really, there's really no such thing as secure, guaranteed employment for life. We are all of us are all at risk of being put out of work if we're not doing what we should be doing, or if our employer isn't profitable, or if our employer wants to offshore. This is the reality of modern life. None of us, there's nobody in this room that has a guarantee of their job and of their income.
But Grace, can I just interrupt there? It's not happening to the full-time employees of the brewery. Well, I mean, they are full-time employees, but they're part of a labour hire company. So presumably, if they tried to do this to their other employees, they'd have huge problems with industrial relations.
Well,
so they can get away with it, I'm saying.
Well, there's two issues. One is being sacked, and then one is being asked to accept less pay. So a company can outsource, they can dismiss people, they can make people redundant. The other thing they can do is they can ask people to accept less pay if they feel that the people have been paid too much, as long as they don't go below the award. So, we have laws, and those laws are reasonable. Now, I know Jed might think that they need change, and she might not be the only person that would think that, but we do have laws, and so companies have rights under the law and employees have rights under the law. Now, it doesn't always leave everybody happy with the outcome, but I guess the point I want to make to you is that whilst I'm very sorry that it has happened, there's a bit of an adjustment happening in Australia, and in any correction there is pain, and you're not the first person.
Does that mean people have started drinking less beer? Because I didn't notice that.
No, it's just... Can I just say, the CUB was making a lot of profit. $4 billion profit. You had increased productivity. The workforce had increased productivity. What was the, by some enormous amount you put in. There was no reason to sack them. They weren't misbehaving. They weren't doing anything wrong. Absolutely none of that scenario that you just listed was happening. This is purely for profit greed. This is the only thing.
But you're calling for... Let's just get the union's position straight here. You're calling for... Sorry, Judith, I'll come to you in a second. You're calling for a boycott, but not industrial action. Why is that?
We were asking consumers. Well, they are taking industrial. There's a community protest happening.
Yeah, but you haven't called out all the workers in the brewery, for example.
We've had a couple of stop works, haven't we? A couple of times that people have actually walked off the job at the brewery. But we've decided to take this approach really to make make the whole community aware of this situation, because a lot of people are very anxious at the moment. Job security is the #1 issue, and so people look at these guys and think that could happen to me.
But it could. It could
happen to
any of
me,
us.
and so it shouldn't be able to. That's the thing.
Judith, you want to jump in earlier?
Well, the way we're talking about it is as if this happened overnight, and in fact the maintenance side of CUB at the Abbotsford plant has been outsourced for some time. It goes back to 2009. So you kind of got to get the history and geography of the story. So there was one labour hire firm called Quant that had the contract with CUB. CUB decided to terminate that contract, and indeed it wasn't a shock. People were given, I think, at least 6 months' notice. Yes.
That is not true.
Sorry, one
not
of the guys in the middle of this just put his hand up. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, it's a little bit offensive, that, because they told us in January that they were going to...
Well, that's 6 months.
To alter our working arrangement, but they didn't know what they were going to do. And then they signed a contract with the outsourcing company, the new outsourcing company. And then both companies denied that they'd signed that contract when questioned about it. Then they began advertising our jobs when we were still working, and denied it again that they were advertising our jobs. And then they got us to a hotel under false pretences and then sacked us. So, I mean, I've worked there for 40 years. I'm hardly a contract worker. I'm somebody who's given my life to that brewery, and their behaviour's pretty disgusting, really.
All right, let's hear from the other panellists. Richard Di Natale.
Oh, well, firstly, I feel for you and your mates. I think it's appalling treatment, of people who have given great service to what was an Australian company, and you deserve better than that. Yes, it may have been legal. It doesn't make it right.
No.
Okay? It
No,
may have been
I'm
legal,
not
but
saying it's
it doesn't make it right. And what you've got is ordinary people who have given long and faithful service to a company. At the same time, it has to be said that the outgoing CEO is getting paid tens of millions of dollars, a company that's not paying its fair share of tax. I mean, it says everything that's wrong with the priorities of some corporations in this country. So, yes, job insecurity is a huge issue. I mean, it's behaviour like this that makes people feel uncertain, that means that people are lying awake at night with big mortgages thinking, I hope I still have a job. And just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right.
John Roskam.
Well, companies can change working arrangements. And we've spoken about profits and about big businesses. They're the people that employ us. And what has happened to you is certainly very difficult. But companies can change contractors. They must pay redundancies. They must give you notice. And whether it's you or a Holden worker or a Ford worker or anyone else in any industry, no one is guaranteed permanent employment.
But
as
John,
difficult as it is.
They can choose to keep them employed.
They
can
absolutely
choose to
can.
keep those
And
men
they can also
employed.
choose to change working arrangements.
It is not right. You know, what has happened here is absolutely not right. And that we have a government that is sitting there just letting this happen, giving the message to any other corporation right around, you want to evade, fair employment terms, this is all you have to do. You outsource to a labour hire firm and then bang, you get 3 people on the other side of the country to sign an EBA that these guys don't have anything to do with. Done. It is a bad message and it shouldn't happen in this country.
So, John, let me just, if you were sacked and they brought in someone at half the price, half the salary, you'd be pretty aggrieved by that.
Absolutely, but I'm not sure that's exactly the case in this circumstance. As Judith pointed out, the workers did get notice. My understanding is that you are able to get a redundancy. And companies can
we just interrupt there, because we can go back and find out, because I understood that they were offered to reapply for their jobs but at lower wages and lower conditions. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the contract we were offered was the award wage plus 50 cents, and for a maintenance fitter in Victoria, that's $19.50.
Right, so you were offered the chance to go back.
Sorry, Tony. So we weren't offered the job to go back. We were offered to reapply, and we were told that anyone had the same opportunity to reapply for those jobs. OK, Tim Watts, we haven't heard from you.
Look, and Chris, your story as an individual story is deeply depressing to me. It's something that I find quite outrageous. But the particularly outrageous thing is that it's indicative of a broader trend that we're seeing in our economy today. These kinds of arrangements, which seem intended to evade the workplace obligations in the legislation at the moment, are becoming increasingly common. And like Jed, I think that it's important that the community sends a message about what they expect from companies over and above what might appear in the law. Now, I was at the AFL Grand Final a few weeks ago. I've mentioned a few times recently that the Western Bulldogs broke their premiership drought for the first time in 62 years. That would have been a perfect day for me, but I couldn't have a beer at the ground because I was standing in solidarity with the CUB 55, and a lot of people in the ground were doing so as well. So this is a campaign that's gotten a lot of traction in the community, I think, and more power to you. I think that it's sending a really clear message about what the community expects, both from corporations and from the law.
And just very briefly, have people stopped drinking this beer? Because that's the boycott you're calling on, and I suppose if that actually did happen, that would be a message.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to actually take the opportunity on behalf of the guys up there to thank the entire community for the support they've given this campaign. We had nearly 10,000 non-CUB grand final barbecues that were hosted and that they let us know. We've just been crazy on social media. The support for this campaign has been amazing, and I think that just goes to show the level of pain that people are feeling about this and the absolute disgust at how you've been treated.
All right, now I mentioned at the beginning that industrial relations is definitely on the political agenda this week. The next question addresses that. It's from Bradley Woolley.
Following the Prime Minister writing today about the influence of the CFMEU on the construction industry and the importance of passing ABCC legislation, do you think that the Labor Party's strong relationship with trade unions such as the CFMEU puts them in a vulnerable position? I'll just start with John Roskam on that and come to Tim Watts afterwards. So, John, go ahead.
Well, I think it absolutely does. There's upwards of 100 people from the CFMEU officials before courts at the moment. I think that the influence of the CFMEU has made building costs much higher in Australia than they should be, up to 20 or 30% more. This is a real question for the Labor Party about their relationship with working people and working people who are missing out because of the actions of a rogue few. And I think the ABCC legislation is very necessary.
Is your sense that it's going to go through this time?
Yes,
They won't do a joint sitting, we imagine, because having only scraped in with the one seat in the House of Reps.
The public understand the actions of the CFMEU mean we can't build as many hospitals. Roads are more expensive. Public infrastructure is more expensive because of the actions of a rogue few that is affecting the reputation of the entire Australian Union.
And some workers don't come home at night.
Rubbish.
Some workers don't come home at night because of workplace health and safety issues, and it's really important to have somebody standing up for the rights of ordinary working people on building sites. We have a huge problem in this country with people coming to harm on building sites because of workplace health and safety breaches, and it is the role of the unions who help to ensure that we have safe workplaces for people. So, I mean, that's the perspective from the IPA. The perspective from most ordinary Australians is that they want to work in a safe workplace, and that's what unions do.
Richard, we all share that view, but the Boral dispute, for example, has got nothing to do with health and safety. It's about union power.
Well, if there's an issue...
Can I just interrupt you there?
Yeah.
Because obviously questions have been raised about the Greens. I was going to go next to Labor, but since you broke in, I'll go to you. With the Greens accepting large campaign donations from the union movement generally, but specifically from the CFMEU, can you tell us now how much in the last financial year that union donated to the Greens?
Well, as far as I understand, not a cent. We haven't received any donations from the CFMEU for the
It was reported in the Australian
campaign.
it was $125,000.
I think that's going back. That's going back a number of years, Tony.
Well, they said it was in the previous year. So.
My understanding is that they didn't make a contribution to us for the federal election campaign. I can check that. But I mean, look, the issue.
Does it affect? I mean, everyone worries when you get big donors. You talk about yourself all the time. If the donations are now coming to you from unions like this, and you oppose this legislation, where there's a relationship between those two things?
So our position on support for ordinary working people and the representation they get from unions, and certainly within the CFMEU here for construction workers, is based on some pretty fundamental principles. That they're there to advocate for the rights of working people, for fair pay and conditions, to ensure that they get a safe workplace. That's the basis on which we support the union movement. Now, if you're talking about corruption within the construction sector, let's have a national anti-corruption watchdog. Let's not single out the one union. I mean, I feel like we're having these fights that belong, in another century. You've got the government, this sort of ideological witch hunt, going after the union movement, and it feels like they're fighting battles that belonged in the 60s and 70s.
But Richard, that's not true. It applies to employers too, the ABCC.
Well, let's have a national anti-corruption watchdog.
Hang on.
Right, to ensure...
Make your point quickly, so we need to hear from
Let's
everyone.
have a national anti-corruption watchdog, something the Greens have campaigned on for a long time, and let's ensure that when it comes to... if there are instances of criminal behaviour, well, people should face prosecution. But this is some ideological witch hunt that's not doing anything to keep workers safe.
Well, 113 of them are facing prosecution, according to the Prime Minister, for more than 1,000 offences.
And if they're facing prosecution and they're found in breach of the law, then they'll be prosecuted.
I'm going to hear from the other side of the argument first, Judith. Sloan.
Well, I think it's really important to understand that, in fact, these kinds of tribunals are very common overseas, because construction has certain features which makes it very prone to hold up, basically, and it also makes it very prone to cartel-like arrangements between big construction companies and unions. So, in fact, Richard, if you go and look at the legislation is not targeting the CFMEU. It actually does affect other unions, and it does affect the employers. And that's something you should be celebrating, because what it does, it is the means by which you can impose a code of behaviour on employees. The trouble with the construction and why it is so expensive, and Jed, you may try and query the figures, but all the international benchmarking studies tell you that construction is extraordinarily expensive in this country, that you've got to try and undermine the cosy deal between the employers and the unions. Now, Richard, you must agree with that.
Well, I'm not going to let you start running the panel now, Judith. So actually, I'm just going to quickly go to Tim Watts, because the question was initially addressed to the Labor Party's position here, and whether you're compromised by your relationship with the union. That's the point the Prime Minister's making. That's the question that was asked. Go ahead.
Look, this is an easy question for me. We're not compromised by our relationships with the unions. We're strengthened by it. You know, probably the defining trend of our times in an economic sense is increasing inequality in our society. There is abundant evidence that a greater density of union membership is one of the best ways to combat that inequality, to increase the quality and the standards of living of ordinary working Australians. That's what unions do. So I'm really proud of the relationship between Labor and the trade union movement, because we have the same objective in life, and that's making life better for working middle-class families, increasing their quality of living. That's nothing to be ashamed of. That's why I went into Parliament.
All right, Grace.
Tony, I find this whole debate bewildering and disappointing, because the legislation that goes with the ABCC, it allows the government to have a building code, and that is an anti-corruption code of conduct. That code of conduct only applies to building companies. It doesn't apply to unions. And so I get very disappointed even when I hear people in the government, when they talk about this, you know, we need the ABCC to pull the CFMEU into line. I think, no, this is not just about union misbehaviour. Yeah, sure, there's some union misbehaviour, sure. But this is about corporate profits at the expense of taxpayer funds. That's what it's about. So when a great big project is built, the biggest companies that build those projects, the head contractors, they will essentially, they price fix and everyone gets the same, and that price fixing goes down through the subcontracting layers. There comes lots of corruption, lots of opportunities for corruption, lots of graft. So it's not just about, you know, a union being militant and these union members taking home all this money and ripping us all off.
So are you saying the Prime Minister's selling this in the wrong way?
I'm saying that the government, yeah, they need to start talking about, you know, as Judith said, cartel-like behaviour, the corporate profits, and you know, the company behaviour, because the code applies only to companies, and the way it works is if a company breaks the code, then the government won't give them any more work. So it actually doesn't even apply to the unions. So
well,
I get
that's not true, because part of breaking the code is actually having an EBA with the union.
No, it's not having an EBA.
It is. Now, let's face it. This is so crazy. This is not about going after employers. No employers have been prosecuted. This is not. This is about...
They've been kicked off
This is
government
about
jobs.
absolutely union breaking. Do you know, in 4 days, 3 people died on construction sites. In 4 days, 3 people. 2 men were stuck in a pit when a concrete slab fell on them. They couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't get out of it. They saw the slab coming. Their co-workers saw them died. Now, you know,
I just say,
and is this law about making that safer? Is this law about making construction sites safer? No, it's about stopping their fellow co-workers downing tools and going off-site when that sort of things happens. They could actually be charged under the legislation if they did that. Is it about that? No. Is it about making sure that construction companies don't employ backpackers and put them in terrible situations? A young woman, a backpacker, no skills in construction, was employed, probably underpaid. Who knows what she was being paid? Was asked to climb on a bucket up at a height to do a job. She fell off and died. And that employer said, oh, it was her fault because she didn't put her harness on.
OK, I'm only interrupting you because Grace Collier just said this is not relevant.
So these laws are not about taking those employers.
It's not relevant.
Explain why you say it's not relevant.
Well, look, OK, for a start, any accident or you know, injury that happens to a worker at work should not happen. It should never happen. Safety is very important.
So why are we attacking workers with the ABCC?
Why don't you let me finish?
No, because I didn't finish, actually. Because I didn't.
We'll come back to you, but she was making a point about the safety issue you raised.
Safety is incredibly important. Employers have obligations under the legislation. An employer last week was sentenced to 7.5 years jail because they breached safety laws and somebody was killed. So it is very, very serious. But unfortunately, this stuff does not have anything to do with that. And this is where I get so disappointed. You get the unions on one side, which is basically the Labor Party. You get the coalition on the other side, and they're like, rah, 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 rah. What this is really about, this is about corporate profits. It's about the biggest companies in our economy, or some of the biggest companies in our economy, the big construction firms. And it is about them entering into a business model, a market arrangement with unions that inflates the price artificially of building in this country. Yep, the unions get some money along the way, but essentially this is the business model that these corporates use.
Okay, now we'll have to finish with you, Jed. So you want to respond to that?
Well, I apologise for butting in before, Grace, but really it's not about that. Everybody knows that all the rhetoric, all the noise. This is about really taking away the rights of construction workers. It is, you know, they boast. Nigel Hadkiss boasts about, you know, all of these construction workers that he's laid charges against, really for things that are exercising their democratic right to protest, for actually downing tools when something is unsafe because a union worker hasn't filled the paperwork in properly for going on site. You know, these are not heinous crimes. What are heinous crimes is when somebody dies on site because safety hasn't been attended to.
But just quickly, you arguing that the ABCC will make it less safe?
Yeah, absolutely.
All
And
right.
we have evidence to show that, absolutely.
Well, I think that's conflating two topics, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, the employer has a strict duty of care to the worker. The ABCC is a different matter, and no one actually is questioning either the role or the importance of workplace safety. It's
Okay,
just
I'm sorry,
that's a very
guys,
convenient
we're half an hour into the
conflation,
program,
Jed.
so we're going to move on
That's
to
not true,
other
Judith.
subjects,
It is.
That
if you
isn't
don't mind.
true.
It's time to move along. The next question comes from Jack Allen.
Is it right, in relation to Trump's admittedly, Donald Trump of course, his admittedly horrendous remarks about his pursuit of certain women, to judge a person's suitability for public office on the basis of morally questionable comments and actions, assuming they're not criminal, made in a purely private capacity, when such comments do not have a direct bearing on the individual's ability to execute the functions of the office which they seek?
Richard Di Natale, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm staggered that he's still a candidate for president, to be honest. I mean, that stuff should have just disqualified him straight out. What a repulsive human being this guy is. And I mean, it's not just these comments in isolation. They're appalling comments in, you know, sexual predator and all the language that goes with that. Michelle Obama's speech was terrific, by the way, and the message, you know, I think that she said that she was concerned that it sends to young boys and girls. I commend anyone to have a look at her speech. But, you know, it's on the back of previous comments. It's on the back of wanting to build a wall to keep Mexicans out of the US. It's on the back of, you know, wanting a ban on Muslim immigration. Now he's talking about, I think he implied that Hillary Clinton was on drugs or something at the last presidential debate. I mean, this is wacko stuff. And it would be, you know, the problem is the man is, you know, an election away from becoming the president of the United States. I mean, it's not just that he's a vile human being. He's also potentially very, very dangerous. And so, of course, he should be judged. What I'm really, you know, staggered by is that there are still Republicans in the US who are backing him. You've got people in the US who are still behind this on the back of a litany of interventions that each and every one of them should be enough to disqualify him from office. So, look, I just hope that, you know, in a few weeks' time, he's a footnote in history and we can move on.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly go back to our question because he's got his hand up in the air. Go ahead.
Just to clarify, I agree that a number of his actual policies are horrendous, but I suppose what I'm saying, if we focus on things done in a private capacity, I mean, you open up the capacity for people to mention...
You mean what he calls locker room talk?
Yeah, but people could bring in Bill Clinton and say, well, Hillary Clinton initially defended some of the women who made accusations against him. Now, I think we can all agree that many of his policies, all of his policies are idiotic. Can we focus on those and disproving those instead of bringing personal things into it, which can lead to the mudslinging which is endemic in politics?
Okay, Grace Collier first.
Oh, look, Tony, I think in this era of smartphones and everything, I mean, hands up in this room, honestly, hands up if you've never ever said anything stupid, obnoxious or offensive when you thought you weren't being taped, right? We've all said come on, be real, right? Now, I mean, I think back some of the things I've said over the years. Horrible. I'd hate to have somebody sitting there with a tape recorder and then pull it out 10 years later, because you all say stupid things that you would not want broadcasted. Having said that...
Is it a bit different when he actually advocates sexual assault? Because essentially that's what he's saying. I'm so famous, I can do this. For example, I can grab a woman by... Well, we won't even go there, but you know what he's saying.
Yeah. Look, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sticking up for Trump, and I'm not sticking up for Clinton. I don't care who they elect. I'm not a citizen of the United States, and I don't get to vote. But I just don't think it's a big deal, and I don't think that we should lose any sleep over it, because what will be, and
Should we lose sleep if he becomes president?
Well, look, I think if he becomes president and he starts implementing crazy things, and it looks like their government is going to make the changes, it looks like he's going to get them through Congress, maybe we should be worried. But in the meantime, try and live a happy life. Don't lose sleep over the stupid things Trump said, because there's going to be another one tomorrow, and,
But
don't worry
isn't that
about
the
it.
point? I mean, that... well, first of all, Congress will be a constraint on a Trump presidency, or indeed a Clinton presidency. But more to the point, I think, in a sense, the real issue is, what is it about Trump? Because obviously, I'm not sure I'd use your colourful language, Richard, and I'm not picking on you in particular. But what is it about Trump that enables a really quite substantial proportion of the population to find him an attractive candidate? Now, so he's behind in the polls, but he's not way behind in the polls. So
no, it seems like he seems to have a rusted on, let's say, 35 million Americans.
So I think from a sort of political, analytical point of view, that's the kind of interesting question. What are the real buttons he's pushing that, notwithstanding everything about him, including that terrible hairstyle, makes him, the number one for a high proportion of the population? And I mean, I think, for Richard and Tim, the politicians here, I don't think you can ignore it. I mean, it must be picking up some view that a lot of people feel very alienated by the sort of establishment political process. And, how do you deal with that? I think, there has to be some accommodation in the mainstream, because I think we see it here and we see it in Britain, and we probably see it in other countries.
We'll go to a couple of other questions on this. We've got one from Francis Van Beek.
Hi. I have a question for John. In your opinion, has Trump's presidential campaign damaged conservatism internationally?
John Roskam.
No, I think that's a really important question. I don't think it has, because I'm not sure Trump is a conservative. Sadly, I don't disagree with some of what Richard said about Donald Trump. His private comments go to character. But when Donald Trump says the solution to America's problems, or part of the solution, is a 45% tariff on imported goods from China, that is not a free market or libertarian solution. But I would disagree with Richard's point in relation to Trump as a footnote. When average household income in America in 2016 is lower than it was in 1999, when poverty is up, when inequality is up, when unemployment in America is only relatively low because of so many people not looking for a job, we have a problem. And while all of this is happening, Hillary Clinton goes and gives 3 speeches for $650,000 to Goldman Sachs. And then we ask ourselves, why do 40% of people support Trump? Trump would not have been my candidate. He would not have been the candidate, I think, of a lot of conservatives, of a lot of liberals, of a lot of libertarians. But we have what we have, as Grace said. And if I was in America, I would not know how to vote.
Tim, go ahead.
That's an extraordinary proposition that Trump has not damaged international conservatism. I'd argue that Trump is the death knell of international conservatism. He has been able to enter the scene in the US because conservative ideology has completely imploded. It's not there anymore. There was a time when conservatives believed in things like institutions, conventions, manners, and they used to call these things out. What's happened in the US is they've invited people who have subverted these conventions, have trashed these institutions, into the mainstream of the Republican Party, the Sarah Palins, the Tea Parties of the world. So now that someone like Trump has taken over the middle, there's nobody of any political authority in the conservative movement who's able to say, this isn't us, get out. Now, there's a lesson for Australian conservatives in this, because when Tony Abbott stands in front of signs saying, ditch the witch, things like that. When you bring that into the mainstream of Australian conservatism, of Australian conservative politics, then you undermine your ability to deal with phenomena like One Nation down the track. Because if you're going to call them out for their breaches of convention, their trashing of institutions, well, what ground are you standing on to do that?
Richard, I know you want to jump in on the points made earlier by Judith.
I agree with Judith in the sense that you've got to ask yourself, how is this happening? And obviously we're asking ourselves questions about similar opinions being expressed here in Australia and what's going on. And I agree with much of what's been said, that growing income inequality, stagnant wage growth, there are a whole lot of things that are going on. People are absolutely fed up with what they see as establishment politics, with good reason. I mean, we have a debate in the National Parliament where we're talking about income inequality, which is finally on the agenda. I mean, we had ACOS release their report into poverty. You've got 3 million Australians now living in poverty. You've got, you know, if you're a kid in a sole parent household, there's a 40% chance, 40% chance that you'll be living beneath the poverty line. So there are these enormous issues going on within, I think, many Western democracies. And what you're seeing, in my view, is people like Trump and here One Nation and others who are scapegoating individuals, who are looking to foreigners and easy targets to blame for what are very complex social problems and a failure, I think, of the political establishment. I mean, we voted for tax cuts last week. 80% of households get nothing. When I say we, it was the Liberal Party, supported by One Nation and the Labor Party, $4 billion worth of tax cuts going to the top 20% of households. When 2 weeks before that, again, we saw Labor and Liberal join together to cut support for family tax benefits for basically people on low incomes, vulnerable people, through the abolition of the clean energy supplement. So no wonder people are looking for alternatives. It's just that what we've got at the moment, I think, with people like Donald Trump and here in Australia with our own brand of that, is very dangerous. And it's up to us to show a bit of vision and leadership, to back up rhetoric. We understand that there's a problem with income inequality. Let's back it up with policies that deal with those problems rather than make the situation worse.
OK, we've got one more question on this subject. It's from Miller Harrison. Go ahead, Miller.
I'm a 16-year-old student and I go to an all-girls school. In class we were having really heated discussions about Donald Trump's remarks about women, and we were kind of a bit terrified of the idea of growing up in a world where sexism is so evident and where, you know, men who brag about sexual assault can run for the President of the United States of America. So my question is, how do we prevent something like this from happening in Australia? And if it does, do you think that Australian citizens will want to prevent it?
I'll come to Jed Kearney because we didn't hear you on that last question.
Oh, good on you, Miller. I think that's a fantastic conversation to be having at school, and one that I wholeheartedly can empathise with. I think it is appalling that the possibility that someone like Donald Trump, with those hideous sexist views of his, could possibly be the president of the United States of America. How do we stop it here? I think it goes to a number of the things that our panellists have already said. And I think, you know, Judith touched on the fact that we need to look at why people are supporting Trump. We need to look at our institutions, what is happening to our institutions. I was in America recently and Republicans and Democrats and people from all sides were saying exactly what Tim said. This is the demise of the institution, even of the political party. And then I think we have to look at what Richard's just been talking about, is the gross inequality that is occurring in Australia right now. People are anxious. People are very anxious. Their lives are anxious. Their jobs are insecure. If they do have a secure job, they don't know if they'll still have it. They're anxious for their children. We have areas where there are 40% youth unemployment. They're anxious about things. And when they're anxious, they look for things that they think can fix that anxiety. And unfortunately, it's manifesting, I think, in moving towards things like, you know, like looking for Trump, who's saying outrageous things. But going back to the sexist thing, I'd just like to say that I think it is there's a bit of a silver lining. I mean, my son, he's a beautiful 25-year-old boy. I'm very proud of him. And, you know, it started a conversation about, is that really how men are? Is that really how men talk, you know? I don't talk like that, Mum. You know, my friends don't talk like that. And I think it's really started a reflection here to say, hang on, this is really bad. This is not on. And it might be, I think, a really good start, like yourself, of a conversation about things that aren't acceptable and really bringing it out into the
John
foreground.
No, I'd agree with Jed. As the father of a daughter, I was absolutely shocked. I would not want anyone talking about my daughter or any woman like that. But I'd go one step further than what Jed said. This is a discussion that we can have about women throughout the world. It's not just the United States or Australia, where we are very lucky. We need to understand the situation of women through the world. And if this is something else that comes out of the comments, then there might be some good from them.
OK, well, move on to a related question. This one's from Zach Ellsbury. Zach.
Thank you, Tony. With the statewide rollout of the Premier's Respectful Relationships program next year, does the panel believe that portraying men as the perpetrators and women as victims amounts to indoctrination, which does little to combat domestic violence and may backfire to create tension and hostilities between the sexes? And does the panel think that there's a better, more egalitarian way of dealing with domestic violence which doesn't alienate and brand half of the population as abusers?
Let's start with Tim.
I got to say, I've done a lot of work on family violence in my electorate in the wake of a particularly horrible murder shortly after I was elected. A woman was killed on the main street of Sunshine in my electorate in front of her children by her ex-husband after seeing her lawyer to get protection from the courts on this. And as a result of that, I plunged into this issue to try and find out how it worked. And one of the things that shocked me the most, in fact, the thing that did shock me the most, is how often you hear that question. You hear a question saying, 2 women a week are murdered by a partner or former partner in this country, and what about me? What about men?
I think, yeah, our question's got his hand. I think you might be slightly misrepresenting the point. So let's go back to our question. He's got his hand
up. Men are the perpetrators.
All right.
The statistics are very, very clear.
Let's go back to our questioner there. Go ahead.
While I don't deny that women are victims, surely not every single man is a perpetrator. There are male victims of domestic violence as well, and you can't deny that.
OK, and I suppose the underlying question is, can you fix it through the education system? This Victorian government is attempting to do to some degree. So, Tim, quickly, and more from the other panels.
The Victorian government, in response to community outrage on this issue, there was a groundswell of community action demanding a response from the government on this, initiated the Royal Commission into Family Violence. And that Royal Commission took evidence from a range of people. One of the clearest findings from that Royal Commission is that early intervention education programs can have a really significant preventative impact. Now, I've got to say, I've got a 3-year-old son. I want him learning these things. I want him learning that women should be treated like human beings, like equals. I mean, we lay our ideology over all these things when we're attacking it, but at its core, that's what it's about. It's about teaching young boys to treat women like human beings. I'm staggered that anyone finds this controversial, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not so sure, Zach, that it's really about victims and perpetrators. I think the whole thing is about respect and about teaching young people about respect for each other. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a great thing. And I really support it.
Grace, what do you think?
Oh, Tony, it's a very difficult question, but I just want to say something. I think we need to have a little bit of faith in the teachers that are administrating. We need to, even if the content of the course is not to everybody's liking, and I don't know, I haven't seen the course, haven't read it, but we do need to have a little bit of faith in the teachers that I don't think that there are teachers out there who are going to be deliberately making little kids feel terrible and say awful things to little boys. Now, if that does happen, then sure, let's all get fired up about it. But as to the other part of it about men always being, I agree with you. Men are often the victims. They are mostly the perpetrators, but they can be the victims too. And I don't think that when we talk about family violence, I don't think we should sort of make out or make men feel that it's all their fault. And not you as a man are not responsible for the actions of other men. You're just not. So you shouldn't feel that you are.
John Roskam.
No, I hear exactly what Tim said, but my understanding of the program is it goes a long way beyond respect, regardless of gender. I think what the program does is deny human agency. It denies responsibility. I think there is a heavy overlay of a left-wing agenda in relation to the program. And we have to understand
John, you might need to just explain that because you obviously heard the audience respond.
Yes.
So what elements of it are you talking about?
No, the idea in relation to the gendering of violence, we can absolutely talk about that. But we have to understand we as individuals take responsibility for our own actions. That's what I want my children to be taught, that we take responsibility. We treat all people, regardless of their skin colour, religion, gender, race, as human beings and with respect.
So is it the underlying argument about male privilege that you are objecting to?
Yes, that's absolutely part of it, and it goes a long way beyond respect. And if we were just talking about respect, we wouldn't have this overlay of
Okay,
male
questioner's got his
privilege.
hand up again. I'll quickly go back.
As Jed said, if it's about respect, why do we need the gender overlay? Surely it's superfluous.
Well, let's hear from Richard on this.
Well, privilege is usually invisible to those who have it.
Right.
You know, that's white middle-aged blokes are usually, and there's a few of us on this panel.
Richard, with daughters.
we all benefit from it. Look, I mean, I agree with Tim and Jed. This is about respect. It acknowledges the reality that I wouldn't say men are often the perpetrators. I'd say overwhelmingly are perpetrators. And it's not just about domestic violence. I was actually chatting to a couple of my colleagues at work and some friends, and they just talk about the casual sexism that goes on. Whether they go to a bar or out catching a train with a bunch of friends, and the stuff they have to put up with. And when you have those sort of conversations, it's an eye opener. And I can tell you there aren't too many blokes sitting around saying, I'm not going to go out to the pub tonight because I'm a bit worried about what I'm going to get from the ladies. It is overwhelmingly, I think, we've got, right from the messages we get from people like Donald Trump to the sort of behaviour that we model, we've got a responsibility to try and ensure that we achieve respect. And I think there's absolutely a role within schools for that sort of conversation to happen and to acknowledge what is, a reality. And that is that, when it comes to privilege, it's mostly those of us sitting at this panel who are, male, middle-aged, who benefit from it.
Well, I'll go to someone who isn't. Judith, what do you think?
Well, indeed, the evidence on these public education campaigns is that they're very weak. And I mean, I think, you might want to do it, but if you think that this is the solution to domestic violence, think again.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of these behaviours are learnt behaviours. They're learnt behaviours in the home. And so it's, in a sense, you've got to take a multifactorial view of this. And I mean, the idea that you can, I mean, it'll probably be, a few hours in a year, actually, this program, to tell you the truth. So the idea that this is, I mean, it might be a small part of the solution. The evaluation of these programs show that they don't work. And I think the thing is, it goes back to some of what we were talking about with Trump, is that I think for a lot of men, they have lost their way in life and in the family. And if you listen to Mark Latham, and you can all hiss and boo, but I think, he comes from a Western Sydney environment, and he sees a lot of blokes who've lost their way because they don't have full-time employment. Their role as the breadwinner has been undermined, and that then leads to problems. And of course there's the overlay of alcohol and drugs as well. I mean, we have to, and indeed the high rate of domestic violence amongst Indigenous communities. So, let's accept that this is a complicated problem. And I mean, I'm not actually a big fan of this school program, but, give it a go. Evaluate it carefully, have a control group, roll it out with a target group, and let's see if it does make any difference.
Jed, you have to be quick.
I'll be very quick because I'm actually going to agree with Judith. I do think it is a complex problem, and I do think there are lots of answers, and it's not the only thing, but no one is suggesting that it is a fix-all. The Australian union movement, for example, right now is working really, really hard to get people whose lives have been torn apart by family violence and paid domestic leave so that they can just take time out, for example. Now, and fix things that they have to fix. Now, we're not suggesting that's a fix-all either. I think it is a whole suite of things that need to be done, and they're all very important part of it.
OK, in a way, we're about to get to a related question. You're watching Q&A. The next question comes from Stephen Trumbull.
Thanks, Tony. My father had a clothing factory in the northern suburbs of Melbourne for many years, and he used to always remark that the local women would make garments for him while their husbands made cars for Fords. Now, both those manufacturing industries have been killed off in this country. What's the future for workers with basic skills in this country, and can we afford it?
So, Jed, I'll come to you first.
Great. Oh, that's a fantastic question, Stephen, and I think you just described in a nutshell a really sad situation for Australia. We are losing our manufacturing industry, and there's been absolutely no plan from this government to try to reinvigorate manufacturing, to find where we can actually have a competitive edge in the global economy. They are not investing in manufacturing, and they're not actually helping economies transition. We do know from those industries that you mentioned, the automotive and the textile industry, that the people who did work in those industries, 1/3 of them never ever work again. 1/3 of them get insecure, underemployment type of jobs, and 1/3 of them do actually get a job. When we do know that industries are going to change or whatever, there needs to be a plan about that. We need to know where new industries can develop. We need to know how we can get those workers into those jobs. This government's got nothing. It's got nothing around that plan. Its only plan really is to, well, two plans. One, attack unions, and number two, give tax cuts to
number three, build submarines in South Australia.
Build submarines.
Not that that helps many places.
Well, if we could see that on a big scale, you look in Victoria, we've got Daniel Andrews, who's going to build trains here, which is fantastic. And, you know, the Australian Union Movement has recently talked about a Buy Australia Act. You know, what is wrong with actually saying that for all the national projects we have, you have to actually use local producers, employ local people, supply apprenticeships? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
Let's see if we'll get some bipartisanship from John Roskam on that.
I'm a lot more positive about the future of manufacturing than Jed is. Manufacturing is still 8 to 10% of employment in Australia, but I can tell you one thing. Government can't guarantee jobs. In 2012, Julia Gillard promised $275 million to Holden. In 2012, Holden, the managing director, said, we'll be building cars in Australia until 2022. A year later, Holden announced they were closing.
There was an intervening event there, a federal election. The Treasurer telling them to get out of the country.
That's right.
But Toyota were being subsidised.
Hang on, John.
My point is, Tony...
Can you just answer that? Because you say but there was an election. There was a decision taken to pull the rug out from under the cars.
No, that is not the case. That is not...
I was sitting in the Parliament as Joe Hockey said, get.
No, that is not the case. But
now, Tim, if you're going to try and quote Joe Hockey, you might try and get it right.
Well, look, I was listening quite closely because the Toyota manufacturing plant is in my electorate in Altona. We have 2,500 jobs directly employed at Toyota Altona, thousands more in the component manufacturing industry forward on. So the question that Stephen asked about what is the future of these jobs is one that thousands of people throughout my community have been asking me over the last 3 years. And I've had to tell them this government has nothing for them.
Tim,
They're not engaging with
I'll
this
add one thing to that. Taxpayers were funding individual jobs per year.
Nation with a car industry does.
$50,000.
If it's good enough for the Germans, for the Japanese, for the Americans, 13 countries that can manufacture a car from go to woe, they all subsidise their industry. Why isn't that good enough for Australia when there are hundreds of thousands of jobs?
Tony, I'll just say this. I think it's desperately unfair to say to a car worker the government will give you $50,000 for your job per year, but not to someone else. And why? Not to the textile workers.
Why can you say that? Why can government say that to shipbuilders and submarine makers?
Well, because there's all those marginal seats in South Australia.
OK, so all right, so you're saying that's just purely cynical.
No, I'm not saying it's purely cynical. I'm saying there's some role, but I'm saying Government can't guarantee jobs. Julia Gillard tried to do it, John Howard tried to do it, Paul Keating tried to do it. We can't. The only future for sustainable employment are companies earning sustainable profits, employing people.
But can I say, just based on what you just said, do you think it would be very different if the car manufacturing plants were in marginal coalition seats?
Well, for a long time they were, Tony.
Grace, did you want to make a point?
Oh, look, I mean, I'm going to offend everybody in the room. The government does not owe, nobody has an entitlement to a job. Society doesn't owe you a job. The government can't get you a job. The government shouldn't have to get you a job. There's no such thing as government money. There's your money and my money, and that's where the money comes from. It comes out of our pockets. So, in reality, there's one person in this world that can guarantee a happy future for you, and that person stares at you in the mirror every morning. And I've been sacked from jobs, I've started my own businesses, I've had flops, I've had successes, and the thing is, I believe that, it is every single one of us just has to work out, there is something I'm good at. Everybody has something that they're good at, and everyone does. And then you work out what you're good at, and then you try and make a career out of that. And you don't have to worry about the government and will the government make it easy for you to have a job. Just worry about yourself.
Okay.
Find out what you're good at and try it the best you can.
Well, let's try out the.
Sorry, that's
Richard,
such a bummer.
Well, there's this inconvenient fact that there are more people than jobs. That's why we have an unemployment rate.
Well, people can start businesses.
So that's that little thing there.
People can start their own businesses.
But like that, we're.
Oh, it's terrible, isn't it? Wouldn't it be awful to have to start your own business because someone else has to give you a job?
Grace, I invite you to
But we've
come.
got they're false choices, Tony. They're false choices because we've got on one hand someone saying, "Oh well, no one can guarantee you a job." No one's asking for a job to be guaranteed. What we want's a plan.
Well, why don't you start a business and hire some people?
Well,
Go on, I dare you.
I'm busy at the moment.
Why don't you, Jed? Why don't you start a business and create some jobs?
There's no point me starting a business if nobody has any money in their pockets to spend in that business. Okay. That's right, Grace. Well, so you have to have
let's get some vision then. I'm sure you have some vision for where future manufacturing should go.
Of course. Well,
briefly.
If your view of the world is just let the market rip, dog eat dog, everyone look after themselves, and we just hope, big tax cuts to people on high incomes, tax cuts to businesses. If that's your vision of the world, and it is the coalition's vision of the world, you end up with what we're seeing at the moment. If you've got a plan that says, well, where are the jobs of the future coming from? Let's look at the renewable energy industry. I mean, we have got a potential jobs bonanza coming from the renewable energy industry, and yet what we see is the government, it has to be said, with the support of the Labor Party, joined together to take $500 million out of the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. That's not a plan for the future.
But they're taxes.
That's looking backwards. But
they're taxes.
And how's it working for South Australia?
But it's
free
working
money
really
there,
well,
Richard.
actually. No, but
they're
that's
taxes.
the point.
You're taking money from someone to give it to the renewable energy
To
schemes.
have a plan to create jobs.
And then those
that's
people
the
with
point.
And you lose
to
jobs.
have a plan to
and you
create
lose jobs by taxing those people.
Jobs are going right now. Jobs are going right now. Jobs are going right now. And so we've got a choice.
I think you're all wrong about this. In fact, the labour market actually has been very strong for some time. I don't know why everyone's so dismal about this.
I know.
The employment to population ratio is as...
Tell the 500 people who have lost their job at Ford how well the labour market's going.
And tell the people in the...
Tell them...
That's
I mean,
right.
Guys, I'm going to...
And tell the people in Hazelwood
I'll let you
who are
make
about
a
to
final
lose their
point,
job.
but we have
that's
another
because
question to get
renewable
to.
energy.
We've got one. I'm sure everyone's going to agree on this one. A question from Jed Watmore.
Thanks, Tony. As someone who was probably a little bit late to the party on marriage equality and who's had someone very close to them recently come out, my questions to Tim Watson and Richard Di Natale, and I can clearly understand the contentiousness of this issue. How can the ALP and the Greens turn around to gay and lesbian people in the community when there is no chance of marriage equality in the life of this parliament and say that they've really put politics before people?
Go start with Tim Watson.
Oh, look, really simply, Jed, because they've asked us to. The Labor Party has listened to the LGBTI community, and particularly since the last federal election when the future of this plebiscite was at risk. And they told us very clearly that They don't want a process that asks the Australian people to vote on their status as equal citizens. They don't want a discriminatory process in order to deliver their equal rights. They don't want to go through a process where their own mental health is assaulted by all of the crazy things that we see from people who are very hostile to people in the LGBTI community. So I certainly took that feedback very strongly, and I can tell you I've had hundreds of emails from constituents from the LGBTI community about the plebiscite. Not one of them has been in support of it.
Can I just quick question, because we nearly are out of time. We'll get a brief answers from everybody, but just this one thing. Had that plebiscite been binding on all politicians, would you have a different view?
I wouldn't have had a different view, no.
John Roskam.
Look, the Greens at one stage supported a plebiscite. Labor once supported a plebiscite. I see no reason why we can't have a plebiscite.
Grace.
Oh, look, that is such a good question. I give that the question of the night. I think the situation is absolutely pathetic. I have friends who have been essentially married for 16 years. They've been wearing wedding rings. They want to go ahead, we want to do it, and we are like children in the back of the car with mum and dad screaming at each other about which way to get to KFC. You know, mum wants to go down Smith Road and dad wants to go down North Road. We all want to get to KFC, and they're arguing about it. I think it is absolutely pathetic because people's lives are being held up, people's relationships are being affected, and I just wish that they could get their act together and get this done.
Richard.
Well, to take Grace's analogy a bit further, if going down, whether it was Smith's Road, where there's a drunken hoon travelling at 150 k's an hour who's going to do you harm, you wouldn't go down that road, and that's the equivalent of what we're going to see with the plebiscite. And Tim's right. We actually asked the people who'll be affected by this, and overwhelmingly they said to us, we don't support this process. If we want to get there, but not this way. And I don't agree with the premise of your question that marriage equality is doomed. The plebiscite's doomed. What better opportunity for the Prime Minister than to salvage his leadership here? Like, he's going to go down in a screaming heap in a few years' time, the next election. But this is a train wreck at the moment, this government. Now, he has an opportunity here. He can stand up to those right-wing dinosaurs inside his own party, show some leadership, be true to who he is, because people are feeling betrayed.
So do you seriously think that strategically, politically, he could do that with a one-seat majority?
He will lose the next election if things continue as they are, where people are feeling betrayed. They thought that the Prime Minister had a particular set of values on this issue, on tackling dangerous global warming, and they're feeling betrayed. Now, if he wants to win the next election, the only way he's going to be able to do that is to show some leadership, take a stand against those right-wing dinosaurs, and do what the rest of the country wants him to do, and to be a leader, not a follower of that party. Be a leader, stand up, let's have a free vote in the Parliament, and let's get this thing done. And we can get it done.
All right. Judith, brief answers from the last two panellists.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, using slurring terms like right-wing dinosaurs is not actually part of the civilised debate, Richard. I mean, you're just going to have to wait.
George Christensen, I don't know that the word civilised has been used too often with George Christensen and Corey Bernardi.
Why do you feel the liberty to slag off at people when you're saying you can't have a plebiscite because you're worried that other people's feelings will be hurt?
If George is...
Just be consistent, Richard.
Yeah, if he's offended by being called a right-wing dinosaur, I apologise.
I just think
he would be.
I think that's a faux apology. I think we'll just have to wait. There's no way the Prime Minister can give in on this.
I'm sure he would choose some other animal, not a dinosaur. Now then, Jed, you've got the final word here, and we've only got 30 seconds.
OK, well, I'm going to be really corny then, because I'm just going to say, look, love is love. And I think that there shouldn't be any barriers to it. And I agree with Richard that, you know, everyone will be disappointed that the Prime Minister has gone down this path, because if he had a plebiscite, we wouldn't be talking about love. It would be about divisiveness. It would be about hatred. It would be about all those awful things that we know would come out from those right-wing people that Richard's talking about. No, but from those people that really want to just talk about hate and divisiveness. So I think we should just do it. I think the Prime Minister should just stand up and say, right, we're going to do it.
Thank you so much. That's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, Judith Sloan, Jed Kearney, Richard Di Natale, Grace Collier, Tim Watts and John Roskam. And I'll just say thank you to our wonderful Melbourne audience. Our last program in Melbourne this year. We'll see you all next year. Thanks for being such a great audience. Next Monday, Q&A will be joined by Cabinet Secretary Arthur Sinodinos, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Tanya Plibersek, former Editor-in-Chief of the Australian newspaper, Chris Mitchell, American investigative journalist Christine Dolan, and writer and academic Robert Mann. So good night from the Docklands in Melbourne. We'll see you next week.